Hello, I'm an urban bonsai artist living in Chicago. I've been working with bonsai for over 20 years. In this video, we're going to talk about tree styling. So, there are two ways that I like to think about styling a bonsai. One is just thinking about general composition principles that you might use when designing a garden bed or a painting or any kind of art form. The other way is really getting down into the details of branches and twigs and leaves and understanding what makes a good bonsai and how to achieve those qualities. So today we're going to focus on the first thing, general composition ideas, which often start with considering the style of the tree and the structure of the tree. So this is a Chinese elm. It's one of my favorite bonsai. I actually have 3 of them. And it's a formal upright, also known as chalk-in. So that's the first concept that we're going to talk about, the different styles. There's a number of them. And I'm going to show you some examples here in the studio. But if you want more details, check out a great resource online. Wikipedia has a wonderful page about all the different styles of bonsai. So let's take a look at some of these different styles. So here's a tree in a formal upright posture. This is what we call a chalk-in. That's a Japanese word, but it's derived from a Chinese word meaning straight trunk. And you can see the trunk is perfectly straight, but symmetrical. And there is a taper to the trunk, which is important. You don't want a tree without taper. So the trunk will taper towards the top of the tree. Another tree that's similar but not quite as upright as the moyogi or informal upright. With the moyogi, the trunk is still straight, but it has a gentle curve to it. It might lean one direction and then curve back the other. So you can see here, this is an elm. It's growing straight up. Now it's making this little curve. So you can imagine if I was standing outside of this pot, the trunk would actually be more visible. And I would see this gentle curve. But because we're looking down into the pot, it doesn't seem as pronounced. The next tree is called a shaken or slanting tree, and this is where the trunk is not growing straight up, but it is growing at an angle. And in fact, a lot of bonsai are grown in a slant. It's a really popular style for a reason. It's because most trees in nature grow with a slant. They're usually leaning up towards the sun. They might have something heavy on one side of the root system that causes it to lean. But we do find trees in nature that grow in a horizontal position. That's a great style as well. The next style we're going to talk about is cascade or semi-cascade. So a cascade is where the branches are growing below the level of the pot. And you can see that very clearly in this Chinese juniper. This tree is actually growing in a horizontal fashion. If I was standing around the pot, the branches would be coming out horizontally. But because I'm looking down in the pot, they appear to be cascading. And a semi-cascade is basically the same idea, except the branches are just starting to touch the rim of the pot. They haven't quite gotten to cascading yet. Next style is called raft or haishoku. And this is where there's a lot of branches that come out horizontally from the trunk. And sometimes you'll see this in pine trees. They'll grow in this horizontal fashion. You'll see it in Japanese maples. You'll see it in a lot of different trees. This one happens to be a Chinese elm. And the last style that we're going to talk about is called fuzuki or literati. And this is where the trunk is very thin. It's almost bamboo-like, and the branches are growing vertically. So it's kind of like the opposite of a chalk-in. Instead of having the branches wide and spreading out, we have them growing vertically. And the idea is to have very fine twigs and to create this very delicate, fine textured tree. Now, there are auxiliary styles that we can layer onto any of these styles. For example, you can have a tree that's growing in a slanting posture. It can also have a windswept appearance. Another thing that you could have is a tree that's growing in a vertical or an upright posture, but the branches are weeping down. Weeping branches is another auxiliary style. Also, sometimes you'll have a tree that appears to be split in half. This is called split trunk or bikken. Sometimes the split isn't real. It's just something that's created through pruning. And the last style is called gyoken or driftwood. So this is where the branches are growing in an unusual posture. Sometimes they're growing out horizontally. They've been broken off and they're growing at an angle. In addition to thinking about style, we should also think about structure. And structure is basically talking about how the branch and twig structure grows out of the trunk. You can see here this Chinese elm. The branches are growing out in an interesting way. And there's a couple of things to think about. First, you want to make sure that the branches are not crossing over each other. You can see here there's a branch crossing over another branch, and this is called ramification. You want to make sure that your branches aren't crossing over each other because that makes it difficult to prune. It also makes it hard to spray the tree with water and pesticides. And it's really one of the hallmarks of a good bonsai is that you can see all of the branches and twigs. Another thing to think about is the angle of the branches relative to the center of the tree. So you don't want all of your branches growing out in exactly the same plane. You want to have some branches growing out at an angle above the tree. You want some branches growing out below the tree. And you can see that this tree does a good job of that. Here's a Chinese juniper that does a nice job of creating contrast through the angle of the branches. So you can see here there's branches growing out above the center of the tree and there's branches growing out below the center of the tree. Another thing to think about is the number of branches that you have. It's a little bit like having notes on a piano. If you just have one note, that sounds pretty lonely. If you have two notes, it's an interval. It's a little bit better. But when you have a full chord, it's much richer. And this is what a good bonsai is like. It's not just about one branch. It's about the collection of branches. So with bonsai, you want to have a minimum of 3 branches. And this tree does a good job of that. You can see here there are several trunks that are coming out at different angles, and they're all contributing to the overall effect of the tree. Another thing to consider is balance. So balance is really important in bonsai. You want to have balance in the size of the tree, the shape of the tree, and the weight of the tree. So this is a fairly symmetrical tree. There's a branch on one side and there's a branch on the other side, and the branches are roughly the same length. The weight of the tree feels like it's balanced too. This is a small tree, so it doesn't feel top heavy. It doesn't feel like it's leaning in any particular direction. And the last thing to consider is contrast. Contrast is really important in bonsai. You want to have contrast in the size of the tree, the color of the tree, the texture of the tree. So this tree has a lot of contrast. You can see here the bark is very smooth and light colored, and the new growth on the tree is dark green. So that creates a nice contrast. You also have a contrast between the trunk and the branches. The trunk is very smooth, but the branches are becoming more gnarled and textured, and that's intentional. We want to have that contrast. And even with the foliage, you'll see a lot of times we'll have small leaves next to large leaves. We'll have needles next to broad leaves. That contrast is what makes a bonsai so interesting. So thanks for watching. I hope you found this helpful. Stay tuned for more videos.